Aggressive Retsuko is a tragically romantic, slice-of-life workplace comedy about an average Japanese office lady in the form of a red panda who expresses her frustrations with everyday life by way of death metal karaoke, and it's one of the most broadly accessible adult cartoons that has ever come out of Japan. Each episode is 14 minutes long, and there's 10 episodes a season, so it only takes as long to catch up on the whole thing now as it would take to watch a 26-episode show with an OVA. And I strongly recommend doing so if you own a Netflix account, because I think it's easily the best Netflix original anime that has continued for more than a single season. Aggretsuko gets away with pushing its characters deeper into emotional corners than most popular media because of its cutesy character designs, over-the-top comedic expressions, and big bombastic tension dispersals that form the backbone of each season's structure. Now, given that I've been doing a made-up bullshit YouTube job for 9 years, it honestly surprised me that I, Trixie the Golden Witch, whom you can support on patreon.com/goldenwitchfire and find more of my writing on goldenwitch.substack.com, could relate so much to the hardships of regular office workers. However, I couldn't shake the feeling while watching Aggretsuko that the exact fear which has kept me out of regular society is that I am so much like Retsuko that I would face all of the same problems she does in her position. And in fact, I'm surprised how much the same personality flaws have also affected me in my own line of work. In comparison to the protagonists of other workplace dramedies, Retsuko is not such a hopeful and admirable character. There are things to appreciate about her, and it's easy to be on her side in a lot of the conflicts because of the unreasonable circumstances that she deals with. But the series does well to showcase not only how Retsuko herself causes many of her own problems, and a lot for the people around her, but also how the people causing her problems also have their own sympathetic aspects and can occasionally be rooted for against her. The moment which first really sold me on Aggretsuko's writing came in episode 7 of the first season, when her chauvinistic pig of a boss that she's been raging against in private for most of the show so far gets the chance to turn the tables and lay out everything he finds pathetic about her in a freestyle rap, and his observations are largely spot on. Director Ton is a deeply problematic person, especially in his relationship to Retsuko, but in this moment it becomes clear that Ton has been pushing Retsuko's boundaries all this time because he can't stand how miserable she is about a situation that she refuses to do anything about. Retsuko is on the all-the-way passive end of the passive-aggressive spectrum at the start of the show, even though she feels just as much anger and negativity as anyone else, but bottles it up through most of the day, only releasing it when she feels completely safe and alone. As I've said of myself in one of my classic tracks under the hip-hop moniker Trial of the Golden Witch, which you can find on all music streaming platforms, she's the type to seethe. Aggretsuko's central gimmick of emotional release through heavy metal has kind of been done before in cult classic comedy series Detroit Metal City, which similarly featured a milquetoast protagonist with a deep-set dissatisfaction with his life, propelled by his tendency to lapse into a dissociative identity as the world's most legendary heavy metal demon, Johann Krauser II. DMC was a lot more unhinged though, and part of the joke was that Enishi-kun came off as unlikably pathetic, whereas Krauser is an utterly insane terrorist from hell that you can't help but love because of all the hilarious scenarios that he generates. Retsuko isn't becoming a different person, but rather using heavy metal for what I consider to be its very core purpose as cope music. Thanks to the popularity of heavy metal bands like Metallica and Slipknot all around the world, I think the heavy metal music in Aggretsuko, while legitimately heavy for the soundtrack of a Sanrio cartoon, and certainly comparable to the sound of the DMC soundtrack, ought to be accessible to any audiences with any familiarity to rock music. And also, it uses these songs mostly for over-the-top comedic release, which contextually creates a similar effect in people who love metal as it does probably in those who aren't familiar with it. Series director Radeko-san provides the death metal vocals for Retsuko, and as a death metal screamer myself, I truly appreciate how ear-splittingly shrill and unintelligible Retsuko's screeches are. Obviously, he knew there would be subtitles on screen for all the death metal scenes, and there's even a bit where Retsuko explains that part of the appeal of screaming is that you can talk shit without even people who overhear you understanding what you're talking about. Retsuko is so dedicated to maintaining the specific sound of her death growl that she even carries her own karaoke microphone around with her at all times. I know there's real vocalists who use specific mic presets and probably do have a mic they bring to every show, but karaoke settings in particular are some of the most insane to filter shrill metal vocals through, as this show will teach you. I love that Aggretsuko's incredible yoga instructor, who can only say protein, figures out the number to dial for the death metal instrumental that Retsuko likes to scream over in her karaoke booth. I don't know that there's a ton of freestyle death metaling going on in this world, but it's certainly something I've done, even if I'd be more likely in feeling the way Retsuko does to scream along and thrash out to, say, non-objective portrait of karma by a circle takes the square. Actually, I think what makes Aggretsuko a special contribution to metal culture is how it most accurately captures the root from which heavy metal attitude springs. Metal is, by and large, the music of sensitive, simmering people who want to be understood, but don't really know how to communicate because their reactions to things feel more intense than how they seem to feel for other people, and so they keep building it up until they can find a place and time for release. Retsuko's deepest flaw, which is magnified even more intensely in Haida, is being self-absorbed out of neurosis brought about by her intense fear of judgment and failure. She's always a step behind herself because she's trying to do more than she should, because she'll take on the requests of others without making requests herself, even though it gradually chips away at her well-being to burden herself with so many expectations which she only becomes less and less capable of fulfilling. After 5 years of trying to play catch-up with herself, the series introduces us to a Retsuko just on the brink of breaking. But in that, it also gives us a protagonist in a desperate struggle for emotional survival. Retsuko's most admirable trait is that she never stops trying to find a way to make her life more satisfying, and discovers ways to handle her situation better as she learns from her failures. Her character arc, from plotting to quit her job over the false promise of a friend's alternative business, or by way of marrying into money in the first season, to quitting her successful idol career so that she can more responsibly handle her main job at the end of the third season, is actually inspiring, and I couldn't imagine the Retsuko we see in Season 4 being half as meek as the Retsuko from Season 1, even if she still has some difficulty stepping outside of herself. Retsuko's worst trait is her deeply avoidant nature. She tends to take a negative view of her situation and the people around her, and to want as little to do with other people's business as possible, because she already can't handle her own business, which she is weirdly guarded and secretive about, to the point of worrying people who are trying to keep an eye on her. There were moments in the first season of Aggretsuko when I felt like she was a bit of a judgmental asshole for the way that she looks at some of her coworkers, and I was happy to watch her get to see the good sides of some of those people and learn to respect and admire them as the series continued. Almost all of the characters become sympathetic and likable over the seasons, even if each of them has times when they might be difficult to root for. Often when a character is introduced as the centerpiece of a major arc, they are reincorporated later in interesting ways which occasionally deepen them. Director Ton is probably my favorite major character besides Retsuko because he is so much more fleshed out than you would expect from the way that he's introduced as just an unremittent bore. When he first shows off his abacus skills by calculating the cost of Retsuko's education by the company when questioning her desire to leave, it's obvious that there's more to him than just the work-avoidant bully of a boss. Ton has been with the company for 30 years through thick and thin, and came up in an even more intense environment with even more hard-ass bosses than what he has perpetuated. Aggretsuko is written and directed by a now 56-year-old man, drawing from a combination of his own experiences as well as the ideas of character designer Yeti in writing the series. He notes in a Netflix interview that the story of accidentally wearing slippers to work is based on a mistake he's made several times, and Nariko expressed his surprise that Aggretsuko had gotten so popular in the United States because he felt he was drawing on older genre tropes and impressions of the Japanese workplace than what most modern people could relate to. Even within the show itself, characters often express that it feels like Retsuko's work environment is trapped in the 80s because of how their boss can't adapt to the times, which I find to be an interesting position coming from a director who's been doing Flash-based digital animation for a lot longer than it's been the cool thing to do in the Japanese animation industry. Nariko even stated that the #MeToo movement made him realize that the modern workplace in America isn't as progressive as he had assumed, and he attributes that to Aggretsuko's reach. I definitely agree that the show's strong feminist messaging has helped it to find success in the West, but I also think that Nariko's perspective brings a lot to the table, as he is able to write these older, abusive characters like Ton from a convincing and even sympathetic angle, because he really has spent 30 years in the Japanese workforce. In the second season, Ton is massively humanized with our meeting his twin teenage daughters. Oppressively energetic with their loud synchronized speech, Ton's girls are tech and culture savvy and easily bowl their father over with their knowledge about everything, given that his brain space is all devoted to old-fashioned accounting methods. Ton's complete inability to evolve or innovate makes him a compelling thematic opposite to Retsuko, and we gradually come to understand that Ton is more than anything a master of protecting his own safety in the name of his family. When his job is threatened, he will completely transform and push himself beyond the impossible with an abundance of energy for work that none of his employees can even fathom. He will throw himself at things he doesn't understand with enthusiastic abandon to the point of terrifying others, because at heart, he's actually way more devoted to what he does than anyone else can understand, because he's put up with more than any of them have in his long time with the company, and is decompressing it all onto them as he watches them work. Even though Ton seems like an asshole and a bully, he actually is paying attention to his employees and understands them a lot more than they think, especially Retsuko. Over the course of the first 3 seasons, there's all these moments where Ton sees what Retsuko is doing and is able to imply much more about her situation than what she is explicitly led on, and then he offers more sincere and effective advice than all of the people orbiting around her waiting to understand what's going on. By the time Ton is canned by new management in Season 4, Retsuko has developed enough respect for his family and his ability to work that she hires him and his daughters to run her YouTube music career until he's able to come back to the company at the season's end. In a strange way, Director Ton, who doesn't understand computers, is the living computer to Aggretsuko's mad scientist, the person who always appears when she's about to fail her experiment to remind her why she still works for the company and why she isn't fundamentally whoever she's trying to be this time. In the first and some of the second season, Retsuko doesn't believe that she can be happy at her job, but also doesn't have any clear idea of what she would do otherwise. If it weren't for this or that frustrations, it seems like Retsuko would actually be pretty content, but her underlying discontent with herself leads her down all these weird avenues of self-discovery, which mostly bring her back to the same place she's always been, but with a new mentality. Retsuko's biggest dilemmas in the first season are largely the product of her naivety. When we meet her friend Puko, the show gives a sense of how different lifestyles are often defined by your natural behavior patterns. Puko travels frequently between Japan and America, living a low-cost bohemian lifestyle and involving herself with lots of people who are doing interesting things independently. As such, she has the right lifestyle and connections to set up an imported goods store, and also the proper expectations that it'll take years of lucky successes before the thing grows to a scale of having a storefront and feeling like a big deal. Retsuko thinks that she can just hitch herself to this dream when she first hears the broad concept of it, but is severely let down when she realizes the lifestyle changes that she would have to make to afford working for a startup. Retsuko's other escape plan is to marry herself into the life of a housewife, even though as viewers, we were introduced to her by way of her incredibly unkempt apartment and general lack of social skills. To this end, she starts working out, and in the process develops one of my favorite female friendships in cartoons history with a pair of older ladies that work for her company. Gori and Washimi are high-class, boss energy ladies who carry themselves with deliberate confidence and pride themselves greatly in everything they do. A pair of friends not unlike these two helped me out a lot in the early stages of my gender transition with kind of the same energy, so it warmed my heart immensely to see the way that these two took charge in helping their younger coworker and guiding her through the life of an office lady. Gori is probably my favorite character after Ton because of the very subtle way that she's characterized through her design. Whereas Washimi is naturally beautiful and has a cold, calculating demeanor that keeps her away from emotional damage, Gori puts in a lot of effort and faces heavy emotions all the time, but she is empowered by her experiences. Gori is the perfect role model for Retsuko because she's capable of enjoying herself and getting all kinds of things done out of respect for herself and enjoyment for riding the rocky road of life. She's always taking risks, falling on her face, and racing straight into the next thing without hesitation, because she's learned to savor the taste of heartache just like she does the taste of victory. Whereas Washimi seems unwilling to debase herself or be seen in a lowly light, Gori is only concerned about enjoying herself and getting the most out of her life no matter what it looks like from the outside. I loved watching these old friends get into a serious feud in the third season over their different outlooks on life coming to a head. Retsuko's first relationship is broken in a way that some of mine have been, that in the desperation to realize the thing's existence, Retsuko refuses to address its flaws, and projects her feelings and expectations onto her partner in a way that blinds her to his true nature and intentions. Risasuke comically doesn't even seem to register that he's in a relationship with Retsuko, but several of the people who care about her notice the trouble that she's creating for herself by hitching to someone that barely acknowledges her existence, much less recognizing the discomfort that she's causing herself trying to be good for him in ways that he doesn't even understand. Director Ton is the one who actually wakes up Retsuko to her situation, and the relationship ends predictably. Her second relationship also ends predictably, but is a lot more complicated and tells us a lot more about Retsuko as a person. She meets Tadano-kun at driving school, which is way more intense in Japan than it is in America, and reluctantly finds herself falling for him in spite of her impression that he is unemployed. Retsuko seems to find Tadano's presence relaxing because of how little he seems to be stressed about being able to accomplish the most basic upkeeping of social appearances. He is someone who she can share her world with without consequences, who will always be on her side because he doesn't view the stakes of her situation in the same way that a regular person in society does. Fascinatingly, even though Retsuko is trying to marry her way out of her job for most of the first season, her budding feelings for Tadano lead her to consider financially supporting him herself. In a weird way, this moment perfectly encapsulates everything great and terrible about Retsuko all at once. Retsuko doesn't really hate her job as much as she's just dissatisfied with her life. She's missing a spark, a guiding inspiration for why she's doing whatever she's doing, which constantly leaves her wondering why she's doing whatever she's doing. The people most satisfied with their office jobs are the ones with families at home that they've dedicated themselves to taking care of. And the younger workers range from Tsunoda, who is arguably girl bossing pretty hard, even if she does it in a way that everyone hates, to Feneko, who's entertained enough by log stalking everyone around her on social media that she seems to get more out of being in the same situation as Retsuko than her friend Retsuko does, even if Retsuko can't relate to that sort of dark way of thinking. Before I move on from Tsunoda, I have to mention one of the best lines in the show, when she states that if it only feels like you're losing, it's not the same as losing. On the one hand, there's a lot of tragedy in this line's suggestion that Tsunoda is, in fact, setting aside her pride and her sense of self-worth in order to butter up to the boss. But at the end of the day, the way that she sees it is that the rewards of that effort are putting her ahead on the road of life, which is no different from what everyone else is trying to do by putting themselves in this demeaning work environment in the first place. It's like Tsunoda's asking herself, what's one more indiscretion if it will take me higher? Which I think is probably the very same mentality that director Ton himself had on his own come-up. And I have a hard time saying that it's not actually a more respectable way to handle the work lifestyle than being miserable about its problems, especially if you won't stand up for yourself but also won't leave. A major arc in Season 2 centers around a new coworker named Anai, who turns out to be a living nightmare because he does in fact stand up for himself, but over every perceived microaggression and in the most intense and horrifying way. His intensity ends up unifying the office in their fear of dealing with him, until the exuberantly motherly Kaba is capable of patiently guiding him through his work, as well as being a more reasonable coworker. When it comes out that he's a god-tier cook, he ends up finding his place in the work community, and along the way, seeing the parenting from Kaba and even Ton inspires Retsuko to begin dreaming of starting a family for herself. And she's definitely dreaming if she thinks it's happening with Tadano-kun. Given that I'm a robe and pajamas in public kind of person, and again, have worked a bullshit made-up job at my own struggling pace for 9 years, I can certainly relate to Tadano-kun in certain ways. However, he's doing it at the highest imaginable level of both genius and income, with ideations of totally changing society with his influence. Now, I've met people before that I knew were going to have an outsized influence and much bigger careers and more exciting lives than I was going to because they're just capable of stuff that I wouldn't be able to keep up with. If I thought I was going to date someone like Tadano, my expectation would be essentially that I was living inside of constant transit in the back of a limo or front of a private jet and trying my best to just help organize whatever he's doing so that he can do it even more. Even though I do dream of living in constant transit, like Retsuko, I also have my own things I want and my own future I've dreamed of for too long to just let go of it and be completely sucked into someone else's pace. Even though I could see the death of this relationship from the beginning, I completely understood what both characters were looking for in it and why it had to fail, even if there's a certain magic in the fact that it happened at all. Tadano remains a part of the plot going forward, as he represents the far-flung possibilities that Retsuko is capable of tapping into. She's enough of a go-getter and a risk-taker that she found herself dating him to begin with, and going into the third season, even after she goes through a period of depression, we see how her growing confidence and self-affirmation makes her capable of much bigger things than what you would have expected from a supposedly mild-mannered office lady. Of course, all of that comes after Retsuko grapples with an addiction in the only way a person as mild-mannered as her possibly could, by way of spending thousands of dollars on a VR boyfriend game. Retsuko could never date a real guy without the intentions of love and marriage because she's too earnest for the kind of dating life that Gory has grinded through for 20 years to sate her taste for younger men. And of course she isn't nearly shady enough to be a drug user. She sometimes has stints of seeking attention on social media, but she's so coded and coy about it that it takes way too much thought to be considered instantly gratifying. Nevertheless, watching Retsuko blow all of her savings on addiction, filtered through a contemporary cyberpunk twist, felt uncomfortably like something I would write. Through bizarre and convoluted circumstances, Retsuko ends up indebted to an aspiring idol producer with a bad attitude who hires her on as a manager, but ends up relying not only on her business aptitude to start making some money, but also discovers her passion for death metal singing and decides to push her as the front woman of the group and chase that alt-idol appeal. As bizarre of a plot turn as this is for an office comedy, it does make some kind of sense in terms of Aggretsuko's cultural pocket. I wouldn't be surprised if the popularity of baby metal had some influence in Sanryo's decision to push a death metal themed cutesy character, and placing Aggretsuko in a group with an aging aspiring idol that pushes herself just as hard in her work and resents the gimmicky push of Aggretsuko makes for a fun dramatic plotline. Watching Retsuko face the ups and downs of sharing something you love with others and making it into a career, and even dealing with an aggressive stalker that hates her for changing the course of the group, pushed the show into even more unexpectedly relatable territory for me. It also showed us Retsuko's true potential and competence, divorced from having to do what she does for work. She is a capable performer because she comes from a place of such sincere emotion, and is able to create another kind of safe atmosphere for herself by performing for the crowd, at least until it stops being safe and starts intruding on her ability to continue working her regular job, to the point of once more having to make a decision about her future. In the end, she goes back to her job because, just like the dreamy lifestyle of dating a celebrity, the dreamy lifestyle of being a celebrity requires eventually adapting a very particular way of life, which, while it has its benefits and drawbacks just like a normal job does, really forces Retsuko to imagine how she wants to spend the rest of her life. And that isn't as an idol or musician, though picking up those side hustle skills does let her do some cool stuff in season 4. On the backdrop of Retsuko's band drama, we also watch Haida begin his downward spiral of abject failure by turning down the perfect woman, Inui, in favor of continuing to chase his foolish dream of dating Retsuko. Aside from that he's been turned down by her multiple times, Haida just doesn't seem like a competent fit for Retsuko. And going by the reactions I've seen to season 4, I think I was one of the few people who was happy that this season was entirely about why that relationship wouldn't work. Haida is even more neurotic and self-distracted than Retsuko is, with such tunnel vision on his obsession with her that he isn't even doing anything else with his life really besides thinking about her, while contributing almost nothing to making her life any better. Haida's crucial unbearable flaw is that he always assumes his presence is going to make things worse, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because of how he constantly counts himself out of accomplishing any connection with anyone. Instead of asking himself, how can I make myself useful to this person, he seems to ask himself, how can I make sure I don't mess things up with this person, and then assumes that anything he does will make that happen. He's an utter coward and lives possibly the most stagnant and miserable life of anyone in the office up until his time with Inui, and then finally for the brief period he manages to successfully date Retsuko in the 4th season. When Haida finally develops the confidence to believe that he actually can make things better for the people around him thanks to the motivation of dating Retsuko and the praise and promotion he receives from the company's new boss, we are then shown how his personality wouldn't simply be fixed by finally getting what he wants. Haida's rise to power is only made possible by way of the new boss fucking over the older employees, and Haida and the new boss end up even committing corporate crimes together in the name of supposedly making things better for everyone. But really, they're just restructuring the company in a way that benefits them, and isn't necessarily secure as a long-term plan for running the place. I think the latter part of Season 4 will make some viewers uncomfortable, especially if you really liked or connected with Haida and were happy to see him finally get with Retsuko, because it does kind of feel like the characters make some weird decisions in order to create this corporate caper plotline that we might not have expected Haida to become the villain of. But I thought this all felt congruent with my understanding of his personality, and if anything, it was more the roundabout way that everyone else had to approach dealing with him that was harder to accept. I was proud of Retsuko throughout this season for how far she's come as a person, to the point that she can actually take a backseat to fleshing out the other characters for a while. Season 4 starts with the completion of her so-called yoga training having made her into a martial artist, and with her confident ability to manage side gigs and friendships inside and outside the office, it finally feels less like Retsuko is trying to complete herself, and more like she's looking for a relationship from a place of confidence as an individual. She demands that Haida approach her from an equal place of confidence, and even though that takes an amount of stringing along that I wouldn't have considered worth it, she does eventually get him through the doors of her apartment and they happily date for a while. But Haida ends up taking what he's getting for granted, because it doesn't seem like he ever really understood the value of it in the first place. When pressed to answer why he loves Retsuko, Haida explains an anecdote which shows how Retsuko, while she can be sneaky and underhanded in her own way, decides to be that way about such comically innocent behavior that it comes off as adorable to him. Similarly to how Retsuko felt at ease when she thought that Tadano was just a failure to society, before realizing he was actually so far above everyone's heads that he couldn't grasp society looking down, Haida is soothed by the thought that Retsuko is even more neurotic than he is. But actually, Haida is wrong, and Retsuko knows that. She and Feneko are pretty fucking brutal and cold to him, and treat him like a pushover in a way that he doesn't even seem to register because he is, in fact, such a pushover, up until the point when he's given enough belief in himself to turn into a dirtbag instead. Basically, Haida is a person with a lot that he wants but little to offer, and again, in this way, is just a more extreme form of Retsuko. She believes that she should be getting more out of life, and is disappointed every second that she doesn't have it, but at least she has the pride and courage to keep trying to make her situation better. In a very roundabout way, she finds places where she's needed, learns more about her strength, and develops strong relationships with even the coworkers that she once completely hated. While Haida is pretty much just continually pining after Retsuko while he gets drunk with Feneko and misses out on women more suited to him because he can't make a decision. The one major contribution Haida makes to the workplace is implementing shortcuts which allow them to be more efficient than they were under Ton, who doesn't understand technology and doesn't want to change anything. But when asked if the shortcut is bug-free, Haida simply answers that he hasn't had any problems in 3 years of using it, which is good enough for the new president, but within a couple of episodes, we see it horribly crashing when Haida uses it on another system and costing him hours of work. This new president thinks he's being ruthlessly efficient, but he's really just cutting corners by using the ideas of a subordinate he doesn't know and wouldn't trust this way if he had seen his work ethic before he had started dating Retsuko. Haida is now in the position of needing to impress, so he looks for even more ways to cut corners and please his boss, with no understanding of how anyone else is affected by these decisions because he's only ever been sucked up into his own mind. It might seem weird that Haida goes so hard into his work instead of spending time with the girl that he's been pining after all these years, but really this is the natural state of their relationship for him. He never spent anywhere near as much time actually engaged in Retsuko's life, where he would have found himself intrusive, as he did thinking about her and making assumptions about what their relationship could be from a distance. One has to wonder if he even really considered what he might do with Retsuko once they were actually dating, or if he really saw her as more of a muse that justifies his continuing to work at a job he doesn't otherwise care about. Dating her wasn't going to flip a switch that magically makes him care about the job sincerely. It just gives him the self-comfort to stop dragging his feet through every step of life. When he hits the ground running, though, he barrels straight into the iron wall of Retsuko's willpower. I hope there will be more of Aggretsuko, especially because I do want to see Retsuko potentially find a fulfilling long-term relationship and maybe establish a lifestyle that she feels comfortable with and doesn't have to bounce around so much, at which point I'd like to see the series close. I have no idea what the future actually holds for the show, but I think it's been superbly entertaining and has captured the worldwide zeitgeist between the coming and aging generations at this moment as well as anything possibly could. From an aging writer-director who's always been way ahead of his time, and a millennial designer that dresses like she's in a TikTok video, Aggretsuko is perfectly formed to take the present moment by storm. If you liked this video, take my subscription box by storm and be sure to ring the bell so you actually get notified of new videos. Support me on Patreon or by subscribing to my Substack, where you'll find bonus articles and podcasts by following the links in the description. You'll also find links to my music review channel as well as other ways to support my work, and you can find me at Golden Witch Fire on all social media. Thanks again for watching, and always remember, anime forever.